Curveswords are one of my favourite weapon types in all of Elden Ring, and in the DLC we were lucky enough to have a few more added to this category, but there is actually one curvesword that is really powerful, because not only does it do the most hits per second with its insane Ash of War, but it also has an innate bleed build-up which will allow you to deal thousands and thousands of damage. Of course, the weapon I am talking about is none other than the Falx, and as I say, with the right build around this thing, it can be an absolute monster, so let's just jump straight into it so that you too can tear up everything in Elden Ring. Now of course, just before I show you the crazy build around this weapon, I should obviously tell you how you obtain it in the first place, and the Falx is actually the weapon that's being wielded by our good friend Hornsit, who is of course one of the main NPCs that you find throughout the Shadow of the Erdtree. Now of course, without spoiling too much, depending on how you go about his particular questline, depends on how early or if you can even get your hands on this particular weapon. But of course, for those of you that are looking to get this weapon as quickly as possible, all you simply need to do is to firstly speak with Hornsit at the High Road Cross site of Grace, where he will be standing there just in front of Leda. As long as you make sure that you exhaust all of his dialogue here, and made sure that you rest at the site of Grace to ensure that he's actually disappeared and left a bunch of maps behind, giving you the indication that he's moved on with his quest, you will then actually be able to speak to Leda afterwards, to which she describes that Hornsit is trying to take down Messmer. Again, without spoiling too much, all you simply need to do after exhausting all of the relevant dialogues at this site of Grace, and obviously making sure that Hornsit has disappeared, is then working your way through Shadow Keep to get to this particular area. It's quite a vocal point in the Shadow Keep, as there are various different ways that you can go from this cross section, but when you get here from the first time after speaking to Leda and Hornsit at the High Road Cross site of Grace, there will now be two summon signs in this particular corner. If you decide to hover over the red summon sign and invade Hornsit's world, upon defeating him, you will then not only get his armor set, but you will also get his weapon, the Falx. Other than just openly defeating Hornsit in the various locations in the open world before this point, this is going to be the quickest that you can actually obtain this weapon, whilst also giving you a bit of storyline dialogue between Leda and Hornsit himself. But of course, unfortunately, we're not here to discuss the lore today, we are just here to discuss his insane weapon, which is a very unique curvesword. The reason why it's unique is because when you two-hand this weapon, you will actually get a duplicate in your opposite hand, allowing you access to its quick double slashing moveset, but it also comes with its own unique skill. That skill is the Revenger's Blade, and as you're going to be seeing throughout the gameplay in the background, the initial stage of this Ash of War allows you to charge at your enemies, and you can actually charge this Ash of War up by holding your LT or L2 button to give you a longer run up before you slash at your enemies with this attack. But that's not all, because if you follow up with a heavy attack, so pressing RT or R2, this will then unleash that ultimate DPS move that I mentioned in the intro, which does indeed help proc successive damage output buffs. Throw in the fact that this weapon also comes with an innate bleed build-up of 55, with one full successive use of these two attacks. Not only are you going to be doing thousands of base damage, but you are also going to be proccing bleed. Just to give you a bit of reference as well with the gameplay in the background, it is only from New Game Plus 1, but the beautiful thing about this, especially as we're relying on the bleed damage, is where bleed is percentage based, you will essentially always be dealing the same amount of damage no matter what New Game Plus that you're in, as depending on the enemy that you're up against, whenever you do proc a bleed, you will be doing anywhere between 10.5% to 15% of their base HP. But of course, with the right stat distribution, you will still have around about a 540 base AR with the weapon, and with the right buffs and talismans, you can be doing around about 1000 damage every time you use a light attack. And of course, to mimic that crazy amount of damage, here are the stats, and as per usual with all the characters on this channel, it is a level 150 character, and as you can see, we've got 50 points into vigor, 14 mind, 24 endurance, 39 strength, 60 dexterity, 9 intelligence, 25 faith, and 8 arcane. Now the intelligence and arcane arcane are at their lowest. My base character with this build was a samurai, so essentially do not put any points into intelligence or arcane, but of course the main focus for this build is dexterity, as we get the better scaling rating with dexterity. And for those of you that are tackling the DLC, feel free to put this character up to level 200, and I highly advise that if you do that, definitely take dexterity all the way up to 80, as that will be the final soft cap with that stat, before then taking your vigor up to around about 60, 65, faith up to 33 so you can run things like Howler Shibiri, and then distribute the rest of the points into either endurance or strength, because if you want to run a much heavier armor set, then pump the rest of the stats into endurance, but if you want a little bit better AR, then of course pump the rest of the stats into strength. But as I say, if you are still a level 150 character, as I'm showing, by having 25 faith in this build, that will allow us to run both Flame Grant Me Strength and also Golden Vow. So not only are we getting the extra damage buffs with our physical attacks, but we also get a slight increase in our defense as well as stamina regeneration. And that 24 endurance is more than enough to run a relatively decent armor set. As you can see from my character, I was actually running Lader's armor along with the Great Helm and then scaled gauntlets and greaves, and this was giving me around about 57 poise as well as a very good defense. But of course I could still actually increase my defense further by running a much heavier armor piece. I just chose Lader's armor because it looks cool and I really like that armor piece, but even with the 24 endurance you can still run something a bit heavier. But of course with those stats I also highly recommend running these following talismans, and again feel free to pause the video and jot down the names of them, but where we are going to be proccing bleed relatively easy, especially if we rely on the Ash of War to deal that insane damage very quickly, we would benefit quite well by running the Lord of Blood's Exaltation, as that will give us a 20% damage boost whenever a bleed proc does occur. But then I also highly recommend running Millicent's Prosthesis to not only get the +5 in dexterity, pushing it up to 65 in total, but we will also get our first boost to successive damage output, which can actually be stacked with the Rotted Winged Insignia, giving us our second boost to successive damage output, before then finishing off the talismans with the Shard of Alexander to give us a +15% boost to our damage output whenever we use the Ash of War. But of course all of the buffs don't stop there, because we've still got the Wonder Physick, and inside of that I highly recommend that you run both the Strength Knot tier as well as the Thorny Crack tier, because you'll get a +10 to your strength, increasing your overall damage as well as some extra defense, and then the Thorny Crack tier will give us our third and final boost to successive damage output, which when all of those fully proc is how we are going to be doing over 1,000 damage every time we hit our enemies, even just with the base light attacks. This weapon and this build is very quickly becoming one of my favorites, because again, one thing that I haven't mentioned so far about the Ash of War is it's got brilliant tracking. So if you're up against a more mobile enemy, say someone like Melania or Morgott who likes to jump around the arena, whenever you start your Ash of War, and especially if you charge it so you run a lot further, your character will of course follow the enemy, so if they dodge out of the way you will still be following them to then swipe them, and then you can decide whether or not you want to follow up with that flurry of attacks, or you can just start going in with the normal light attack combo. But essentially either way you are most likely to proc bleed, and as I say, do thousands of damage really easily. It's definitely a weapon that can apply a lot of pressure in PvP as well. I'm personally not too much of a PvP fan, mainly because I suck, as the gameplay is also probably showing in the background, but I know a lot of people are loving these weapons because, as I say, you can track your enemies down and just hunt them down with that Ash of War, and it's super fun to use. It is super satisfying if you can get that full flurry of attacks off, because they also do a large swipe at the end, which again can do upwards of 2,000 damage alone. So realistically, even without the bleed damage, you're going to be doing anywhere between 4,000 to 6,000 damage just with the swipes. So even against enemies that are immune to bleed, like obviously the Elden Beast and Radagon, this can still be a very viable option. So if you're looking for a new cool weapon to use in the DLC, this is definitely one that I recommend using, and this is of course how you make the ultimate build around the Falx. But I want to know from you guys, are you a fan of the Falx or curve swords like this in general? If so, let me know in the comments, and of course if you've got any ways to improve this build and make it any better, again, feel free to get your suggestions down below. Of course, one of them will be using the white mask to give us an extra 10% damage whenever a bleed does proc, obviously adding to the other procs that we had within this build. But as I say, if you've got any other ways to make it any better, let us know below. And whilst you're down there, if you happened to enjoy this video or found this build interesting in any way, if you don't mind me asking you to please leave a like rating on this video. It genuinely does help out the channel tremendously, and it's also the quickest and easiest way to tell me that you've enjoyed this video and that you want to see even more overpowered builds in the future. And of course, if you want to stick around for those future builds, make sure that you subscribe down below, especially if you're new around here. We've already got hundreds of builds that you can go back and look through, and by subscribing you'll stay up to date with all of the latest Elden Ring content that happens on this channel, and it's free to do and you can change your mind at any time. But other than that, I've pretty much said everything that I need to say about this weapon, so definitely go and use it for yourselves. Let me know how you get on, but otherwise I just wanted to say a big thank you for watching this video. Hopefully you have enjoyed it, and I hope you're having an amazing day, but I guess for now I'll catch you in the next video of whatever it is that we make. Bye bye.